measure. It's vital that it's passed, and it's pleasing that it has support of all parties. I commend it to the House.
Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, the Labor Party certainly supports this bill, and can I welcome the measured way in which members have actually contributed to this bill, starting with the Minister and going through my own colleagues and other colleagues around the House. I had a lot to do with the initial legislation, and it's important that the House knows why the legislation was initially put into effect. It followed a range of wrongful actions by the Corrections Department, which led under long-standing New Zealand and international law to those inmates who had been treated wrongfully to get compensation for the wrongful actions by the state against them. Now, the difficulty with that is the wrongful action should never have happened. Corrections were at fault, and the best way of dealing with this problem, of course, is not to have wrongful action against prisoners and therefore not to be awarding compensation. But mistakes were made, compensation was awarded, and the nature of many of the people who received compensation actually had done some pretty awful things to other people. And I felt, along with a lot of other New Zealanders and members in the House at the time, that if compensation should be given for the wrong done to the inmate in prison, then surely compensation should also be available to the wrong done by that inmate to that inmate's victims. And, you know, that was what motivated. I mean, it wasn't about baying for blood, David Clendon, with respect. It was trying to address this problem. If you're going to give compensation to the inmate, surely the victims of that inmate were entitled to get their share of that compensation. That sounded right in justice terms to me, and I knew that this would be particularly hard to do, and for that reason, among others, we put a sunset clause into it. Let's do this, let's do what we think is right, and let's see how it works. And I think the most important comment today was made by my colleague Charles Chevelle, that said, well, it's been going for 6 years now, and only one case has been taken. Now, that suggests to me that our concerns at the beginning of the process, well, we think we're doing the right thing, but is this going to be effective? We therefore need to review it, and there should have been a review. And I regret the fact that that review did not take place in a timely way, but I understand now from the Minister that it will take place, and therefore it's sensible to continue this legislation till we find out a better way of addressing the problem. But I said before, Mr Speaker, that I was pleased about the measured way in which this debate was taking place. Let me quote this from the debate in 2005. The National Party in opposition is opposed to the Prisoners and Victims Claims Bill. We believe that payments to prisoners should be blocked, stopped and wiped out. We don't believe that New Zealand should be constrained by the figment of what the United Nations might or might not state in various conventions. These were conventions, Mr Speaker, that we had respected for 50 years under respective governments. Who made that comment? Tony Ryle, now our Minister of Health. Now, you know, I've just got to say that the current Minister in government is taking a different attitude from the then opposition, national opposition spokesperson when National was in opposition. And I say I've got to welcome my comments from New Zealand First, Dennis O'Rourke, because this is what your predecessor said, Dennis. The result of the Labor government's legislation will be that scumbags, murderers and vicious criminals on long-term sentences will harass and taunt prison officers purposely to such an extent that even if there's minor retaliation, they'll be entitled to compensation. Now, Mr Speaker, that was just so much rubbish. And from time to time in this House, people do speak rubbish for the wrong reason. And what I welcome today is that we will have a proper debate about this. We'll review it. There is a sense of justice that if somebody gets compensation who has harmed others, then that person's victim should be entitled to compensation. I don't think anybody opposes that principle. The real question that we face in this review is how to find a way in which we can allow that just outcome to occur. And it seems to me that if this legislation has been used so seldom, then such a review is necessary. So I welcome the fact that I was told to speak for 2 minutes and now I've been told to speak for 10. But I have to say, Mr. Speaker, it is the background to this. I think is really important. We want a justice system that treats victims fairly. We want a correction system where people who have committed even horrible crimes nevertheless are treated under law and according to law, and that their position is not abused either. I was not prepared as Minister of Justice in 2005, and I'm not prepared now to say that basic human rights conventions passed by the international community should be ignored by this country, which is what the National Party in opposition was saying then. I mean, it was unthinkable. Not the United States, not Australia, not the United Kingdom, not any civilised country in the world actually ever said or put into their legislation that people whose rights are abused, even prisoners, should not be entitled to be treated under law and to redress when their rights were abused. So I think, and I hope in the House today, 6 years later, there is a level of maturity and principle that means that will be accepted as a bottom line. But let's have a review of how the system works. Let's find out whether it was an aberration that the Corrections Department was abusing their rights in terms of the requirements on them under law and the way they should treat inmates. I'm not soft on inmates, but I do believe that everybody's entitled to humane treatment in this country, even those who have broken the law and committed horrendous acts. I believe they should be locked up and kept locked up for a long, long time if they're a danger to the community too. But I don't believe in any system that says that people who are subject to control of the state can be abused and have no rights against that abuse. So let's try and do this on a bipartisan basis. Let's not make political capital out of it, as my quotes from the past have suggested. Let's be mature about it. Let's find a system that works for the victims, because the right of the victim, the rights of reparation, I think are fundamental. I believe in a system of restorative justice. If your rights are abused by somebody who offends against you, you should be able to get proper compensation from that person. If somebody steals my property, yes, they might need to be locked up if they keep doing it, but actually what I'd really like to see is them having to pay compensation for the wrong that they have done. And I apply that right across society. More reparations, a restorative system of justice would be a very positive development for this country to take. So, Minister, I hope that the review will be set up early so that there is full time for it to happen thoroughly, that review will consider the rights of victims, and indeed that it will consider the obligations that New Zealand operates under in terms of international conventions. If we can do this without making this House a farce because people are playing silly populist games, we've got a better chance of getting a good outcome, an outcome fair to victims and an outcome that upholds the rule of law even when it applies to those in custody.
Call Alfred Naro.
Mr. Speaker, I stand and rise to speak on the prisoners and victims' claims.